Hello, this is Mike Wallace with Empowered Data Solutions, and wanted to go over a demo file that we have here, Empowered Agents. And this is an agentic workflow and agent setup in FileMaker. This file right now focuses on the Realtime API from OpenAI, but it also is set up where you can use the way that it is, where you can call agents within your own file without using the Realtime API. The functionality here for the real-time API is what was seen at Clara's Engage in Ronnie Rios's demo that he did in the keynote. In his other sessions, he mentioned that I had provided the code for the real-time API integration. The nice thing about it is that the real-time API integration does run completely within a web viewer, and so it does run locally if you need for it to, but I'll be getting into that more. I want to start off, I'm going to be doing this video in a couple of different sections. The first section is going to be a very quick overview of the file, and then I'll dig in a little bit deeper, and then I'll go under the hood in the third section. That way you can go as far as you'd like to and get as much information as you want to, but I'll just start off with a quick demo. Starting off, you can start by clicking this Start Agent here. And when we do that, it's going to open the real-time API. Hello, I would like for you to give me a list of orders that from 2025 that were the largest in dollar amount, the top 10 of them.
Here is the list of the top 10 orders by dollar amount for the year 2025.
All right, now give me the top companies by order dollar amount for 2024, the top 10 companies with their total amount that they spent.
Here are the top 10 companies by total order amount in 2024.
That's good, but I'd like to visualize it. Can you give that to me as a bar chart?
A bar chart visualizing the top 10 companies by total order amount in 2024 has been created.
Let's take the top 5 of these companies and give it to me as a pie chart.
Yes, the pie chart for the top 5 companies by total order amount in 2024 has been created and displayed.
Tell me more about this file. Can you give me the table of contents for the help on this file?
The table of contents for the help documentation in this file.
Okay, that's good. I want you to give me number 10, but I want you to present it to me in Spanish. But I want you to continue to speak English. So just the printout I want to be in Spanish, but you can continue speaking in English.
The section titled Extensibility has been
Actually,
presented.
I want not just the title, I want you to get that information and give it to me.
Here's the information on extensibility provided in Spanish.
Okay, now give it to me in English.
The information on extensibility is now available in English.
You can pause the Realtime API for a few minutes by clicking on this. That's muting. So it will stop talking and it will not listen to me while I click on this. It's just, I've noticed that's a needed feature whenever you're doing this. In order to work with this, you do need an OpenAI API key that you'll need to put in here. I made this red right here because I did want to note the fact that the GPT-4o real-time preview is pretty expensive for the speaking content. So in other words, from every million tokens or part of words that it says, then it's $80 for every million. So that's one of the more expensive APIs. The 4.0 mini real time is cheaper, but it's not as smart. But so just something to be aware of while we're doing this, when you're working with this and playing with it. I have some other basic functionality in here, like navigation and that kind of stuff. I guess I won't go over that for right now. We'll go into more of a deeper dive. But we're going to continue on. If you want to download this, you can go to the marketplace, to our website, empowerdatasolutions.com, and download from there or from the Claris marketplace. And that also will link back to our website. The video walkthrough will have this video in it. And then we have test data for companies and contacts and that kind of stuff. And then we have, next thing I'll be going to is the agents and tools and how that's set up if you want to continue watching. So let's first go over the data related to the companies. This is all just test data, throwaway data that is completely made up. And for each of these contacts we have, or each of these companies, we have different contacts and we have different orders placed from their different contacts related here. All this data ranges from 2015 to 2025. And then so we have the orders like this, and then products. We have about 120 products, about 5,000 orders. Let's go over next the agents. So the primary agent that runs with the real-time API is the one that's running right here, is this empowered core. And that's because I've set this as the model override. Now, just so that, and I'm going to go into this more when we get under the hood, but this agent does not have to run with the audio and such like that. You can call it directly and give it a task, and it will work to fulfill that task without having the audio feedback and that kind of stuff. But the agents are set up with a system prompt, which is just their description of what they can do. It gives them their parameters of how they're supposed to work and that kind of stuff. I have a description here, and I have a category for the type of thing. Also, I have different tools that are assigned to this particular agent. For this one, it can call other agents. This get interview answers is what I was using to get like the table of contents and other things about this file. Each of the tools is simply a script. And that's the power of using an agentic workflow in FileMaker, is that as we create these different tools, these are simply things like for get layouts. This one doesn't take any parameters. It's just a script that returns a list of all accessible layouts in the FileMaker database. And for example, if I look at my scripts here, and I'm not going to go deep under the hood, but see, here's my get layouts. And all I'm doing is just simply this right here is just layout names, get file name, and I'm returning that as a result. So when it calls that, it just immediately exits with that get layout names and gets the layout names. This, of course, does respect the FileMaker permissions. So we'll go into that more detail later. But these tools, like this execute SQL, have some parameters on what is different about the SQL in FileMaker, other SQL, in order to give it some guidance on how to do that. But in order to work with these different agents, that you just have the different tools that are assigned to them. And for example, this is the navigation handler that can get layouts. It can do the navigation. It can select a window and get the different window names. As you notice, this one, I'm actually, for this purpose, to make it easier for the LLM, I'm changing the name of the layout. As I change to a different layout, the window name. I'm changing the window name as I go. And that way I can tell what is there. For example, if I go back in here, I can say, go to the tools layout.
Done. We're
Okay,
now
now open the agent's layout in a new window.
The agent's layout is now open in a new window.
So I have control over, I'm gonna mute this. I have control over, because, so again, this is me keeping it from listening to me while I'm doing this video, but I have control over it doing things like that. I could easily add in the navigation, I don't have one currently. That's how I will extend this to show you how to extend it, but I could easily do a close window tool that would allow it to close a specific window if I asked it to or whatever. What windows are open right now?
The tool's layout and the agent's layout are currently.
Is that all the windows that are open?
Yes, those are the only windows open right now.
Check again.
It looks like there are 3 windows open: Realtime, Agents, and Tools.
There you go. So as you can see, LLMs make mistakes sometimes, and that's why you have fallback on things. For example, and I'll go into this more under the hood, but I check the tools that it's allowed to call, and I check what parameters those tools are required. I'll go into more in the next section. But I did want to go over how this works in an agentic setup, especially when you can build this more complex. You can have multiple agents, and each of those agents are delegated to specific tools and specific responsibilities. And for example, this primary agent, the empowered core, has a tool to call an agent, and that agent could be, for example, the navigation handler. And that just happened when it opened a new window. That's exactly what happened. The primary agent called the navigation handler. Navigation handler actually called the get layouts so it could see, get window names so it could see what windows were open, so that if a window is already open, then it just activates it rather than opening another copy of it. And then it used the navigation to open the window, and when it realized that it wasn't open, then it reported its success or failure up to the empowered core. Same thing is true, for example, whenever I requested the data about sales and that kind of stuff, it made a call to the data retriever. Data retriever used its tool for finding an existing SQL to see if there was a matching SQL. At least most likely that's what it did. If there was an existing SQL record that was similar to what I was asking about, and then it executed the SQL to get the data, and then it passed the data back up to the empowered core, and then empowered core called another agent that was the chart maker to tell it, here's the data and here's what I want you to process. And then it created the chart and came back again to the empowered core saying that chart was done. And I'll show you how to debug that and show exactly what tools were called and what agents were called, etc. But it's a very powerful, and again, this is very simple, but it can be very complex. It's good practice to not overload one particular agent with a whole lot of tools, but you can have a controller like this that will call multiple different agents depending on what it needs to do. And when it calls that agent, it's just calling it with just a prompt. It makes up its own prompt, and I'll show that to you later as well. And then that sub agent does what it needs to do, and it responds back to the primary agent. The tools, I'm going to go into more detail about how to set up tools and stuff in the third section. If you're unfamiliar with JSON, I would definitely recommend that you get into it and learn it. It's definitely not difficult. It looks way more intimidating than what it is. If I look at the preview of this, you can see it's nicely indented, so like that. You can see this, for example, this has properties that are the arguments, and this is for the XUSQL. And when you're doing XUSQL, you have different arguments that are at the end saying, for example, this is the contact ID is related in this SQL or whatever. The LLM doesn't always use this. Many times it just hard codes it into the query itself. But I have these as options, and they are handled in the database. So I can make my additions here and change it if I want to, but I'll go over that later. But you set up your tools here, and then you can mark them as active or not. If it doesn't have any parameters required, then you can turn this off and it knows not to do that. Just as far as the quick overview of if you want to implement this, there are instructions in the system that you can ask for about merging this in. I will plan on making this an add-on later, and so it will be easier to integrate with. But right now, you just have to do copy and paste in the right order, and that's documented if you need it. There's a lot of things that you can do with an agentic flow that is not just, it's not just cutesy talking to an LLM and getting back a response, whatever, even though it's kind of cool, but actually using it to make decisions and move your automation beyond what we've done in the past. Previously, we could automate up to where a human decision was needed. Now we have the ability to move beyond that and have simple decisions made by an LLM instead. If you have any troubleshooting issues like that, that will be covered in the next section. And I'm going to go into the scripts and explain more about what's going on with this and how it can be used, and defining new agents and new tools and that kind of thing. So let's go in a little bit deeper and get more under the hood, and we'll start that now. So looking at these charts, for example, that if you notice for the charting, I have these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different tools that it can call. The interesting thing about that is that the underlying JavaScript and HTML for the Apex chart is all the same. I call the exact same, very simple JavaScript function, but I call it with different parameters. And so if I want a basic chart like line, area, bar, column, that kind of thing, then it requires parameters that are like this, where you have a chart, which is an object that has a type that is a string, and it's one of these: line, area, bar, or column. And then you have a series of data, which is an array, and it has that array is an array of objects that has a name for the series. For example, when it had the top 5 companies, the name would be each of those companies, and the data would be an array of numbers. That's a schema for when you're working with a basic chart. And then if I go to, here's our circular chart, which is pie, donut, radial, bar, etc. And if I look at those, then this schema looks different. So we have the chart object, which is the same. It has the type of object: pie, donut, radial, bar, and polar area. Then we have the series, which is an array of numbers. And then we have the labels, which is different than we had on the other one. They were kind of nested under each other in the other structure. And so this one is an array of strings, one for each label. That's why we have these broken into different tools. The nice thing about this is that once you get this figure out how to add these in the right way, and again, LLMs can help you with that process. But then all this is doing is defining a structure. That's what the JSON schema is for. It defines a structure for the tools and what is required for this tool. For example, here's our find existing SQL. And this one is very simple. It just simply has a prompt. So this is a prompt which you want to search semantically against the stored working SQL statements. So we have a table that is actually not in our menu. There is a SQL layout right here. And this has 20 different examples that I just made up that are prompts. And then when this prompt happens, this is a good SQL statement to use to get that data. And here's some example data that is returned by that. And I marked that as a good query. I did this because I'm planning on setting it up so that when statements are made, if the LLM can determine, is this something that's kind of unique that we want to store, or maybe the user decides when they want to store it, or it comes in and the user can come in and verify, yeah, that gave me what I wanted, and I checked this. And this embedding here, if we go into our semantic search functionality in FileMaker, this does an embedding for this prompt right here. And what that allows us to do is whenever somebody asks the agent for something specific, like what were the total monthly sales of screwdrivers and hammers, maybe they say, what are the total monthly sales of jackhammers in 2025? Well, this can find a query that's similar to that, and then it has something to start with whenever it's creating the SQL. So Ronnie Rios came up with that idea. I thought it was a good one, so I stole it, as I steal a lot of things from him. So anyway, so it can call, that's one of the tools that it has. So this whole tool is simply a single key, which is prompt, and I have a description there, and I'd say, okay, this one is required, and I have here that the minimum length is 10. So in other words, I don't want to try to do some kind of a prompt that's less than 10 characters long, because it's pretty much pointless. But you can add whatever kind of restrictions on here that you want. This process does a loop until it naturally does a loop, whether or not it is called from the Realtime API or whether or not you're calling it manually from the same tool that you have here, same script that this calls, this call agent, can be called manually by anyone to trigger the process. And when it calls that agent, it's going to loop in. For example, if I wanted to implement this in my system, I could simply change this from the Realtime API and say, I want to use just regular 4.0. Let's see, what is this? Let's try this 4.0 here. And then whenever I call the script, call agent, which I have here, is expecting an agent name and a prompt. So I call empowered core as the agent name, and I pass it whatever prompt I want, and it will kick off this process. And first thing it does is it goes and gets the agent information from the agent table. So this agent JSON here includes all of the tools that it has access to, including the parameters that are required for those tools, etc. It has the model that it gets from there. If there's an override here of what model to use, then it uses that. And then it just works through. Here's the model info, the API key. It has the sat completion is where it's pointing to, and it builds up the payload based on the system role of the thing. I do have a thing in here that if it's O1 or O3, it uses user instead of system because system is not supported for those models. But I have all these settings here that you could update and change as the max tokens and the temperature, all those kind of things. And then it gives us, here's our system prompt that is from over here in the agent. And then it has the prompt, which is what was passed to this in the first place. And then it goes through and it starts looping until it's done. So this is where it starts the process and makes a call. Whenever it comes back, it will check to see if there are tool calls that have been requested from the LLM, and the LLM will come back. And if it needs more information or if it wants to do something, then it will do a tool call. So we say, here's what I want you to do. Here's your definition of what you are. That's your system prompt. Here's what I want you to do. That's the prompt. And then it says, here are the tools that you have available to you. And then it comes back and says, okay, I want to run this tool and this tool. And that's why one reason why we have a loop here is because, or actually that's in the, I apologize, not here, that's inside the call tools. So when we get to this point, we're actually passing all of the tools to the call tools subscript, any tool requests that were made, because they can request, if you turn on the flag, which I have in this, they can request multiple tool calls in one call. For example, that maybe they want to get information about the database and also get information about previous SQL calls or something like that. So then, so this script runs to get the call tools, and that's loop in itself. And so I have when I pass into this is whenever I'm doing this, one of the things I'm getting from the agent information when I'm calling, this one, when I'm calling to run the tools here, one of the things that I'm passing into this is right here. Here's my valid tools. and I'm just getting from that agent information the tools array, and I'm getting the function name from that tools array. So basically, I'm going to end up with a list of valid tools that names that this tool can run. And here is the array of tools that it requested to run. So then whenever I go to run the tools, sorry, this one here, when I go to pass the tool calls and the valid tools in, and this is to prevent hallucinations where the LLM tries to call a tool that it doesn't have access to. Or for example, I would see it sometimes where whenever I'm on the empowered core, instead of using call agent, it would try to call the data retriever by name as if it was a tool, rather than calling the call agent with data retriever as a parameter for that. So we go in and we validate those. So if there are no tool calls, we shouldn't have gotten to this point, but we exit anyways because there weren't actually any tool calls. Here's that we start with an empty array for our tool call results, and we start looping through our count of tool calls. Then when we get to here, we exit if we are out of our loop. We run through all of them. So here's the tool call. And so this one is, I'm just getting the array value, a JSON get element of counter -1 because it's 0 based. And then this one here is because for some reason, OpenAI changed the way that they call tools from their standard tool calls when you're working with it to whenever you're working with the Realtime API. Realtime API has a different format for a tool call. So to handle that, I just make all of them the same, make them all into something that matches the format of the Realtime API and process it that way. But here's where I validate the tool. So I have the tool name. Here's my tool call that comes in, and that tool call has a name. I grab that. Here's my valid tools. And I say, this is a valid tool because that tool name exists in my valid tools. Okay. If it's a valid tool, then I try to verify that the parameter is valid. So so I say if valid tool, that's this pass right here, that tool name is in the valid tools. And if it is valid, then I try to verify the JSON. So verifying the tools is we just pass the tool call in. So this is what the LLM sent us saying, hey, I want to run this tool. And here's the name of the tool and the parameter of the tool. And in fact, let me go ahead and take a second to show that real quick. So I use two functions, settings set and settings get. And all these do is bundle up all this functionality in, for example, this is just a whole bunch of JSON. If I go settings get, and let's go JSON list keys. So if I do that, here are the different sections that are currently in my settings. So I have menu, which is this over here, different preferences, real time. The nice thing about using this functionality, for example, if I go and let's see. So I have this functionality. This is whenever I ran the JSON schema, this is where I was planning on saving this back to. So I just had, whenever I bring up the JSON schema to edit or whatever, I save where it was. That way it's generic and I can save it back to a field, or I can save it back to a variable or whatever. But if I'm done with this functionality, like right now, I actually don't need this and I probably should clean it up. Then in order to clear this, all I have to do is to just trim that one key and say, okay, I don't need this anymore. And so when I evaluate that, I'm not getting, let me go ahead and JSON. I'm done with that functionality and I don't need to unset a whole little variable or whatever. I can just trim that branch and all the things that are related to it fall off. The same thing is true. I have here my tool calls. I just have been logging them as I go. And so I should have things in here. Interesting. I just listed it. I'm going to save that. Well, yeah, I'm going to leave this as tool calls and I'm going to run some. Oh, no, it's doing it. All right, let's do it. All right. From the first call that I made, this was, so we have so I said, so this is a call that was requested that it called me. So I said something about getting the table of contents, and it passed the name of the tool that it wanted to call. So this is from the LLM. The name of the tool it wanted to call was to get interview answers, and here's the parameter that it passed to this script or to this tool. Section was table of contents, an array. So because it can request multiple sections at one time if it wants to get back different areas of interest in order to answer the user's question. So the LLM sent this, it ran through this process and ran the script called get interview answers with the parameter of sections is table of contents. And then here's the response. Here's the call that was requested from the LLM. I replied back with that same call ID. And here's the result that came back from with that table of contents right here. So all of that information came back, and actually, I'm not sure this is more than it should have. I'm not sure what happened with that, but it's not. Let's jump to another one here. So and this is how you would debug it. So here's a call right here where it says, here's the function. It has a description of the function as defined in our tools. Use tool to display markdown, So here's the show markdown. And so this is the tool, and here's the markdown that it passed in. Oh, that's the parameter, sorry. But so here is the argument. So here's the call agent. Sorry, it's calling agent data retriever, and it's sending the prompt. So again, this prompt was created by the first agent and sent to the second agent. From what I told it to do, it said retrieve the top 5 companies by total order dollar amount for the year 2024, including the total dollar amount. And so it came back with a response to that with this. It's hard to read, but this result, because it's all the formatting is all here, probably should not have it come back with formatting. But this has, for example, you see here, company, it's a object of a array of objects of results. Here's your company name, here's your total dollar amount, company name, total dollar amount. So this is what the data retriever responded back to the primary caller with. And then it now sends this markdown information to the show markdown function. And then that displayed, that's when it came up with the little table that had that information in it. So that the markdown has the ability to show tables as HTML as such. So again, this is just, it's gonna keep going back and forth. You can see there's a lot of different calls that have happened here, all the way up to the last one where it says the currently open windows this is the response from the call. There's a call agent to the navigation handler, and it says list all currently open windows. Remember I said, are you sure that's right? There's only 2 open. And then it responded with the currently open windows are real-time agents and tools, and give a success of true. And that's where it came back and gave me the correct answer and said, these are the windows that are open. So it got that from the navigation handler agent. So that's much more of a deep dive into like how that is logging. You can watch these scripts happen. Well, I'm glad you made it all the way to the end. And if you need any help with integration or FileMaker work in general or work with AI, feel free to reach out to us at info@empoweredds.com, or you can call us at 945-342-8861.